It's cutdown day in the NFL, and I have takes. The Jets should cut a veteran receiver. The Jets should only keep two conventional tight ends on their roster, and the Jets should consider cutting a rookie fifth-round pick. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, August 26th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and our episode today is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. It is cutdown day in the NFL. The Jets need to trim their roster to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern. On today's show, I'm going to offer the Jets some advice, and this is going to be somewhat controversial advice. I'm going to talk about why a rookie fifth-round pick should not have his roster spot guaranteed. I'm going to talk about why the Jets should only stick with two conventional tight ends on their 53-man roster. I'm going to talk about why the Jets should cut a veteran receiver who most people are expecting to make the team. And I have a few other takes that I'll throw in there. Some of you may view these takes as hot takes. I don't think they are. To me, what a hot take is something controversial said just to spark a heated debate, something to make the listener get emotional. That's not what I'm trying to do. I think that all of my takes are correct. I think that they're unconventional, but I think they're well-reasoned. I hope after you listen, I hope that you'll give them a chance. And I hope that after you listen, you'll agree with me. My first take is at the wide receiver position. And I think the Jets are on the verge of making a mistake at wide receiver. Now, it's not a franchise-altering mistake. In fact, most of what happens today, whether it's the right move or the wrong move, will only help or hurt the team on the margins. We always fear that our team's going to cut a guy who's going to go to another team, become a first-team All-Pro. It very rarely works that way. Most of the time, you either help your team or hurt your team in a minor way by making the right or wrong decisions. I think the Jets are on the verge of hurting their team in a minor way with a wrong decision at wide receiver. And it comes down to this. The Jets currently have, by most projections, 3 receivers on their way to making this team with at least 5 years of experience in the NFL and 0 800-yard seasons between them. They are Josh Reynolds, Allen Lazard, and Tyler Johnson. In fact, not only do these guys not have a single 800-yard season between them combined, they only have one 700-yard season. That was what Allen Lazard did in 2022. And there was kind of an asterisk next to that because the Packers receiver room was really thin that year. So Aaron Rodgers was force-feeding Lazard the ball. Lazard was actually his number one option that year, and he still was not able to put up 800 yards. I don't think it's good roster management to have 3 players like this on the roster. Now, I understand Reynolds is probably going to be the number 2 receiver. Unfortunately, the position group as a whole is pretty weak, which means that Reynolds might be the second best option behind Garrett Wilson. So he's got to be on the team. So that leaves us with Lazard and Johnson. I got to be honest with you. If it was up to me, I think I'd cut both of them because I don't see what either of them is really bringing to the table. I can understand it if you want to keep one, though. If your mindset is, you know what, if there's an injury, we'd rather have a veteran in there who's got a deeper understanding of the playbook, maybe a little bit more nuance to his game, at least more experience than a UDFA rookie. Okay, that's fine. But there's really no justification for keeping 3 guys like this on the roster. I think each roster spot should be dedicated to a player who does at least one of 3 things. 1, help the team now. 2, have the ability to develop into a player who can help the team in the future. Or 3, contribute on special teams. When we're talking Lazard and Johnson, they probably can't help the team now. They both have at least 5 years of experience in the NFL. Lazard more, Johnson 5 years. We know what they are right now. You know, you reach a certain point as a player where you kind of see you kind of don't have any more upside in you. You know, once you're in the league 5 years, you kind of are who you are. And neither Lazard nor Johnson play special teams. Now, you know, I don't think it would be the end of the world if Brandon Smith got cut. I don't think it would be the end of the world if Jamal Pritchett got cut. You know, those are the guys that might be on the bubble if the Jets keep both Lazard and Johnson. But In Smith, you have a guy who I don't know how much upside Smith has as a conventional receiver because he himself is already 26 years old, but he's a guy who can help on special teams. And Pritchett's a UDFA. Look, UDFAs typically don't turn into good players in this league, but there's at least an outside chance that he can develop into something more. And he might be able to help you a bit in the return game. So I don't see the argument for keeping Lazard or Johnson. What skills does Johnson have? I don't really know. What skills does Lazard have? Well, we've seen he really only has one attribute that's a positive. And that attribute is he understands how Aaron Rodgers sees the field. Aaron Rodgers is the type of quarterback who wants his receivers to read the defense with him and then adjust the routes based on what they see. Because essentially the receiver knows that Aaron Rodgers reads the defense at such a high level that he may just adjust the play on the fly based on what the coverage is. That skill is not very helpful when Aaron Rodgers is not your quarterback. There are certain quarterbacks who just see the field at such a high level that they can adjust the play on the fly based on what the defense is doing. Tom Brady was like that. Peyton Manning was like that. And there's certain types of receivers that work well with these quarterbacks. Would Julian Edelman have been a dynamic receiver outside the New England system if Tom Brady wasn't his quarterback? I guess you could argue it, but I think the answer would be no. But because he was with Brady was a similar type of quarterback. Brady, if he saw something in coverage, wanted his receivers to adjust routes, and Edelman was able to do that at a super high level. There's a reason New England struggled so much so much drafting receivers in the Brady era, because Brady wanted his receivers to be able to do that at a high level. It's one of the reasons people always criticize Green Bay for never drafting a receiver in the first round. Well, young receivers have a difficult time reading the defense on an Aaron Rodgers level. I think that was part of the reason the Packers never drafted a receiver in the first round, is they know it probably would not have been a great use of their resources. They probably would not have maximized what they got from that first round receiver with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, because Rodgers, Brady, Manning, guys who operate at that level want a different skill set than your conventional quarterback. With a conventional quarterback, Allen Lazard doesn't give you anything because he doesn't run routes well. He's not fast. He's not dynamic with the ball in his hands. And even though he's big, he's very easy to push around. He does not play like a big receiver. He's not a good contested catch guy. His contested catch rate is like 42% through the course of his career. Mike Evans in Tampa Bay has one season where he was under 50% at making contested catches. Allen Lazard's career rate is around 42%. So even though Lazard is big, he doesn't play big. He plays like a small receiver, and he doesn't bring anything else to the table. So I'm not saying the Jets need to cut both of these guys, although I think they should. But what I would say is you should not dedicate 2 roster spots, especially when you're a young rebuilding team, to 2 guys who are veterans, who don't really help you that much now, who don't have any upside, and who don't play special teams. In an ideal world, I don't think you'd really even want Josh Reynolds on the team. I think you'd want a better wide receiver too, but that's just not doable right now. I get it if you don't want to throw a UDFA rookie into the fire if there's an injury out there, so you want to keep one of these veteran guys around. But I don't see the point of keeping all 3. I actually said this, remember saying this in the offseason, that individually you can sell me on Reynolds. Individually, you can sell me on maybe Tyler Johnson as a depth player. And individually, I'm not going to say getting Lazard to take the pay cut instead of cutting him was a good move, but it's the type of move that you can justify. I don't think you can justify keeping all 3 of these guys on the team, though. So I think that the Jets should move on from at least one of these 3 guys today, and instead keep either like a guy like Brandon Smith, who can help you on special teams, or a guy like Pritchett, who maybe he's got some upside. Maybe there's a little bit the return game you can exploit. That's the direction the Jets should go at the wide receiver position. Now, had you on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're not done talking about pass catchers. At the tight end position, I think the Jets should only keep 2 conventional players. But there's a reason for that. There's a third player on this team who can also help them at tight end, even though that might not be how you think of him as a player. We'll talk about who that is and why it makes a difference as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. So take a flyer on the MVP race. Do you have the guts to take a Jet, Garrett Wilson maybe, as a surprise choice? Crown your champion in August. Are you really bold enough to pick the Jets to win the Super Bowl? Or maybe you're going to go in a different direction? Or parlay your division winner dark horses. Well, maybe a little bit more likely for the Jets to win the division than the Super Bowl, but I think everybody's looking at Buffalo in the AFC East. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. It is Cutdown Day in the NFL. The Jets need to get their roster to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern time. And we can expect the Jets to go right up to that deadline, because those last few players the Jets are going to cut, they're going to try and trade them. And they probably will not be successful. Most it's very difficult to trade a player right before the cut down deadline, because every team in the league knows if you're trying to trade me this guy, you're going to cut him. So why should I give up an asset for this player when I can just get him for free tomorrow after you cut him? But you still try, because there might be a team out there that says, you know what, we want this guy so much that we're not going to risk perhaps losing him on the waiver wire. So lots of decisions need to be made by the Jets. One of the position I have my eye on is the tight end position. And after watching the preseason and also after studying these players, what they've done before they came to the Jets, I think the Jets should only keep two conventional tight ends. And the two conventional tight ends are Mason Taylor and Andrew Beck. Now, the Jets have already cut Zach Kuntz. He was an early cut. Anybody who's cut before Tuesday is a guy who really had no shot at making the roster. So the next guy on the list would be Jeremy Ruckert. And all the reports are that Jeremy Ruckert's just having a rough training camp, and he really did not do much in the preseason games. So people are looking at Ruckert and saying, he's not bringing much to the table. And it feels like everybody's been late to that party, because I look at what's happened this preseason and this year's training camp, and I ask, what's so different about Ruckert now compared with Ruckert's first 3 years in the NFL? Because if you watched him on the field his first 3 years, it's not that different from the reports we've been getting. There's been a lot of, this is a guy who's been hyped up a lot, and I really have not been able to figure out why. He's never contributed much in the passing game. He has the occasional highlight reel block, but he doesn't really add much in that area. I mean, he's not a consistent blocker. He has the occasional pancake, but then you watch him and he whiffs, and it gets a rushing attempt, destroyed at the line of scrimmage. So there's not really a lot that Ruckert's bringing to the table. The only two tight ends I keep would be Mason Taylor and Stone Smart. Now, you may say, well, John, the Jets are going to be a heavy run team. How do you only keep two tight ends? Well, there's actually a third tight end who people aren't really thinking of as a tight end. That's Andrew Beck. And I actually think Andrew Beck might be the best tight end on the roster right now. Now, that depends on how much Mason Taylor can do in year one. Second round pick's a bit of a wild card. Mason Taylor could come out and be really good, or he could come out and look like he needs some seasoning. It's not really clear what Mason Taylor is going to be able to provide the Jets right now. But during the preseason, I thought Andrew Beck looked really good. And Andrew Beck's not just a fullback. See, I think that in today's NFL, there aren't any players who are exclusively fullbacks. Maybe Baltimore's like the one exception. But most of the time, a fullback plays a bunch of different. The guy who lines up at fullback plays a bunch of different roles. And for the most part, the fullback position the fullback role has kind of been given to a tight end. On each team, there's one tight end who lines up in line, but on plays where you want to go with two backs in the backfield, where you want a lead blocker, you stick him at fullback. And that's kind of where Andrew Beck is right now, because if you watch him during the preseason, he was also lining up quite a bit as a natural tight end. So it's not a situation like it used to be in the NFL. 30 years ago, when I was growing up watching the league, it was very distinct. There was a fullback, and then there were tight ends. The two positions have kind of blended in today's league. So while you may think of Andrew Beck as just a running back, he's really more of a tight end. That's kind of the role he's got for this team. And I think the fact that Andrew Beck is a tight end makes Jeremy Ruckert expendable, because the only real conceivable argument for keeping Ruckert at this point is that is that you just need bodies at tight end, that you can't really find anybody else at the tight end position. And even if you kept Ruckert, I think the Jets should be active on the waiver wire looking for an upgrade at the tight end position, because it's undoubtable that there's going to be a tight end better than Ruckert that gets cut by some team. Ruckert just does not bring a lot to the table. I know popular kid, hometown pick, there were a lot of expectations when the Jets drafted him 3 years ago. I had expectations for him myself, but I think at some point you just have to acknowledge that when it has not worked out, and it simply has not worked out for Jeremy Ruckert. And when you think of Andrew Beck as purely a fullback, then it makes no sense to cut Ruckert. But when you think about what Andrew Beck really brings to the table, when you think about his ability to line up at tight ends, it becomes pretty obvious, that Ruckert is really an expendable part for this team. So I don't think that there's really any case to be made for keeping Ruckert. I think the Jets should go with Beck, Taylor, and Smart as their de facto tight ends. Even if Beck is technically listed as a fullback in your program when you go to the games, he's really a tight end. So you would have 3 real tight ends there. Sometimes in the NFL you have to think more of role than of where the player is listed on the program position wise. We'll stay in the backfield. I think there's another thing the Jets need to do at the running back position. I don't think this one's as controversial as some of my other takes, though. I would keep Kene Nwangwu over Donovan Edwards. I've changed my mind on this over the course of training camp and the preseason. Up until the second preseason game against the Giants, I was big on keeping Edwards. He had that big week 1 against the Green Bay Packers. There were some interesting things about his skill set. A guy who came into the NFL as a skilled pass catcher, a guy who had an extra gear, and he showed that in the Green Bay game where he broke a 73-yard touchdown run. Now, the run was taken off the board because of a holding penalty, but you still saw him have that extra gear where he could take it to the house. Edwards now seems to me like more of a practice squad candidate. And the book on Edwards has been pretty simple. Is that good receiver, lots of speed, but doesn't read his blocks all that well. And I think that's what we saw during the last 2 exhibition games. Whereas Nwangwu, first of all, a very good return guy, but also looked like he could help the Jets a little bit at running back if they had an injury. Nwangwu would begin the season as the number 4 running back, so he really would not get many carries, but he looked like he was reading blocks well. He looked like he was running tough. It was a couple times he was lowering his shoulder and grinding out yardage. Also in the Giants game, had a good blitz pickup. So, while you would not expect Nwangwu to get many game reps during the season when you've got Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis in the backfield, if you had a rash of injuries at the running back position, maybe Nwangwu could step up and help you out a little bit. Maybe, I'm not sure he'd be a back who could help you over the course of a month or 2, but maybe if you needed somebody to pitch in as a rotational back for a week or 2, he could handle the job in addition to everything he brought in his return duties. And while there's been some concern about whether the Jets could get Edwards onto their practice squad, I think that concern is just overstated. I think sometimes we overvalue how much other teams are going to think about Jets players. Edwards was a guy who went undrafted. And while it's possible like some other team made him a priority UDFA, if Edwards was really valued by another team, they probably would have used a pick on him. If another team was adamant that they wanted Edwards on their 53-man roster, he'd probably be on another team right now. The fact of the matter is most UDFAs are not that valued. And one run in preseason is not going to change that. I think when teams evaluated Edwards, they knew that he was a guy with some breakaway speed, but the issue was that he had too many flaws to make that speed valuable. I just think that that's the way teams view these players. I don't think that you obsess over a player on another team having a big preseason. I mean, have you watched other preseason games? Are there players who had a big game who you think the Jets should now do everything in their power to get? The answer is probably no. Your guys who are being cut are for the most part not valued, particularly when they're UDFAs. So I don't think Edwards is going to have any problem making the practice squad. Now, continuing to talk about the practice squad, there's a 5th-round rookie out there who I don't think has earned his spot on the team. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about how controversial it would be if the Jets cut one of their draft picks this year and tried to send him to the practice squad. I think it's something they should consider, and I'll tell you why as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, and you can feel the buzz. Fantasy football season is here. Everyone's researching, drafting, and building their championship squads. If you have not joined a league yet, now's the time, and it's all happening on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. Yahoo Fantasy is loaded with fun ways to compete and brand new features that make the game even better. With the season kickoff on September 4th, now's the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football. which offers so many fun ways to compete. Want more ways to play? Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. Want to play instantly with friends? Try the new Draft with Friends mode. Prefer the classics? Get your crew together and go head-to-head in a private league. No crew, no problem. Join a public league, the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. It is Cutdown day in the NFL. The Jets need to get their roster to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern time. And I have a lot of thoughts on what the Jets should do with this roster. Now, if the Jets ignore my thoughts, it's not the end of the world. I'm not saying that this is the difference between going to the Super Bowl and a 3-win season. I think there are just certain things in the short run and the long run that would benefit this team. And the last player I'm going to talk about is a player who I don't think has earned a roster spot on this team. And that's a 5th-round pick, Tyler Barron. And we actually discussed Tyler Barron a few weeks back with Alex Dono of Locked On Canes. But I think if you've watched Barron through the preseason, you've seen a guy who's really made no impact. Now, I'm not saying the Jets should necessarily cut Barron. And the reason I'm not going that far is I have not seen him in practice. So there might be things he's doing in practice that are showing more upside than what we got in the exhibition season. And something that's easy to forget is that coaches aren't just judging players based on the preseason games. They're also judging players based on what they've seen in practice. But during the preseason games, Tyler Barron did not add a whole lot. And I approached the question of whether Tyler Barron should be on the roster like this. Tyler Barron was a 5th-round pick, and most of the time being a 5th-round pick guarantees you a spot on the roster. But if Tyler Barron was a UDFA, would he make the team right now? And I think the answer to that is probably not. Barring some practice flourish that we haven't been privy to, I don't see a lot of arguments to be made that he's shown the requisite upside to justify getting a roster spot. Now, we've heard a lot over the last couple of months about how Aaron Glenn was influenced by Bill Parcells to the point where there have been some comparisons made that are really, really premature. Bill Parcells is one of the 10 greatest coaches to ever live. Aaron Glenn is in year 1 as an NFL head coach. We should go very, very easy on comparing Aaron Glenn with Bill Parcells. Now, stylistically, you've seen some similarities. The way Glenn conducts his press conferences, you can see the Parcells influence in him. But the way Tyler Barron is treated, and I really don't want to pile on a rookie. I want to support it like every Jets rookie I can, but there have to be priority decisions made, and the 53 spots have to go to the 53 most deserving players. Now, when Bill Parcells took over the Jets, people who were around the team at that point would tell you that there was a huge culture change in many ways. Parcells took over from Rich Kotite, who was not a disciplinarian in the least. Kotite was a guy who instilled no discipline on the team, and you saw that on a weekly basis over the 2 years Kotite was here, where the team had just showed zero discipline. Parcells was the ultimate disciplinarian, and he was also the ultimate motivator. And one of the ways Parcells motivated his team was by not letting politics get into roster decisions. He just picked the guys he thought were best. He did not care about draft positioning. He did not care about draft pedigree. And one of the traps you run into in the NFL is teams make moves based on fear of embarrassment. Oh, we don't want to cut this guy because we just drafted him last year. It would be really embarrassing. We get criticized a lot if we cut this 3rd-round pick from last year. It would be really embarrassing if we gave up on the 2nd-round pick after 2 years. We're going to get a lot of criticism. We better hold on to him. Or in this case, we just drafted this guy in the 5th round a few months ago. It would be really embarrassing if we cut him. But that's not a winning approach. The thing is, short-term criticism is always worth it for long-term gain. And back in 1997, when Bill Parcells took over, a lot of people would tell you who were around the team at that point that Parcells made decisions that were surprising because he took the opposite of that conventional approach. It wasn't just based on who got cut. It was also based on who got an opportunity to start. There were guys around that team who were highly drafted players who were not high performers.
Parcells benched them in favor of guys who were lower round draft picks or undrafted free agents. And one of the things I've heard over and over about that point, 1997, when Parcells took over, is Parcells judging players based on merit had a catalyzing effect for that team. Because in a lot of cases, if you're a late round pick, you don't think you're really going to get a fair shake. You think that no matter what you do, the snaps are going to go to the player who was drafted higher, or the roster spot's going to go to the player who was drafted higher. And it's true. Late round picks need to prove themselves at a level early round picks do not. Early round picks get a lot more leeway when they struggle out of the gate. And late round picks get a lot more leeway when they struggle out of the gate than UDFAs do. The amount a team invests in you ends up playing a big role in how the team treats you. And again, a lot of that goes back to optics. A lot of it goes back to, we don't want to cut a guy who we just drafted because we'll get criticized for it. Why did you draft that guy? Well, you deserve to be criticized if you miss on pick. But the best move is if you realize that a guy's not good enough for your team, just move on right there. Because at the end of the day, do you know what cut out the criticism? You may get short-term criticism for giving up on a pick early, but you know what? At the end of the day, if you build a better team and you win games, that criticism goes away. And in many ways, we have a Jets franchise that has been way too obsessed with optics in recent years. The Jets have really become all about optics prior to Aaron Glenn getting here. It's been all about appearances. It's been all about concern about what the media is going to say in the short term, and not enough about building a successful team for the long run. So the question with Tyler Barron is not really, how would it look if the Jets cut a fifth-round pick? The question is whether Tyler Barron's a deserving player of a roster spot right now. Now, look, the guys that just could keep over Tyler Barron, it's not a very distinguished group. So that's another aspect of this, where I'm not going to go out on tomorrow's show and crush the Jets if Tyler Barron makes this roster. But this is a guy who Jets drafted who really, I don't think has done anything to earn a roster spot in training camp in the preseason. And I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world for the Jets to send the message to the league that, you know what, just because we drafted this guy, if he didn't produce, we're not afraid to move on. We're not afraid to admit that, you know what, we may have made a mistake, but we're going to move forward. We're going to put the best team on the field, and in the game, we'll in the end win games. And long term, that's what matters. So that's something to keep an eye on with Tyler Barron. And I have a few other thoughts. I'd like to see Dean Clark make it. I'd like to see Quintez Stiggers make it for special teams ability. I'd like to see Jarek Bernard-Converse make it because of his coverage in preseason. These are small asks of Jets. And I think given Aaron Glenn's defense, the emphasis put on the secondary players, you could justify keeping a few extra guys at safety and the cornerback position. But we'll have an opportunity to see what the Jets do by 4:00 Eastern. That is the Cutdown deadline. And on tomorrow's show, we'll talk a lot about what the Jets did, the players they decided to keep, the players they did not decide to keep. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, this episode, a big thumb up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Jets roster.